Hello everyone, my name's Mr. Linham and welcome to this LyricLand video and it's episode 4 of the Listening Project.
If you've got ears on your head and your brain in between, you're ready for a little bit listening.
Ning, listening. Today in the Listening Project, we're listening to one of my favourite albums. One of the reasons I wanted to make the Listening Project is to share with you music that I think, well, I believe, is truly great and wonderful, and this album is no exception to that. Today we're going to have a listen to Miles Davis's live album, and it's an album called The Complete 1964 Concert, so that tells you when it was recorded. If you've not heard of Miles Davis was a very, very famous jazz trumpet player. He grew up in the 1930s, and in the 1940s he started to play with one of the bebop pioneers, a saxophone player called Charlie Parker. He was also in the shadow of a very famous trumpet player called Dizzy Gillespie. But in the 1950s, he really established himself at the centre of the New York jazz scene, really developing the kind of modern jazz of that era that we now kind of call hard bop. In the 1960s, Miles Davis was at the front of very new waves of jazz, and then through the 1970s he added electronics, and even into the 1980s he was always constantly developing. He was a bit of a kind of musical chameleon in that every time a new era of history started within the world of jazz, Miles Davis was usually some kind of interesting part of it. Now this album is a really interesting album because it's a live album, and when musicians perform live, particularly jazz musicians who are focused on improvisation, you hear them take more risks than they normally would in a recording. In a recording studio, musicians tend to play it safe because they know they're being recorded, whereas in a live recording, they're playing for the audience, and you can hear the audience applauding at various points in this piece. We're going to listen to the tune My Funny Valentine. And My Funny Valentine is a very slow style of jazz. And my first question for you is, what is this slow style of jazz called? Number one, what is this slow style of jazz called? Now, I'll give you a little clue. It begins with B. So, number two is I want you to describe the piano introduction. Our pianist, Herbie Hancock, is an incredible piano player, and there's something really captivating about the piano introduction of this piece, and I want you to find some describing words for it. Number three, now this is really quite a long piece. I think the whole tune is about 15 minutes long, so I don't expect you to listen to all of it. But about 2.5 minutes in, something really interesting happens that I believe to be quite surprising. And as we know, the sound of surprise is fundamental to all good music. So what surprising thing happens about 2.5 minutes in? I recommend you listen to the first 5 or 6 minutes of this. Well, I hope you enjoy listening to Miles Davis's The Complete 1964 Concert and the piece of music My Funny Valentine. Well, I've just listened to that and I do believe it's an incredible piece of music. And if you're at home watching these videos, you can afford to just turn all the lights off and listen to that piece of music for the full 15 minutes because it's truly captivating music. You have to really get into that Zen mindset, don't you? Lovely. So our first question was, describe the style of this slow piece of music. This would be called a ballad, or a jazz ballad if you prefer. If you've got a slow song, whether someone's singing it or not, we tend to call it a ballad because it's a popular song. Popular songs basically mean music between about 1920 and about 1950s, 1960-ish, and they're popular American songs from the Great American Songbook, which was all the songs that were written for the musicals of that era. So we would call this a ballad because it probably would have been, well, this song certainly was featured in a musical at some point, but the jazz musicians would take the songs out of the musicals and do something more interesting with them. It would be a bit like if I started playing a jazz version of an Ariana Grande song, though that feels very, very odd as an idea. So, number two then, it was describe the piano introduction. Think of the describing words of the way that Herbie Hancock played that. Well, I've got a few for you. I think the first one could be atmospheric. It really set up an atmosphere and made the whole energy just go really calm and relaxed, and I think that's absolutely joyful. I think there's a real sense of what's going to happen next. So I would use the word mystery to describe it, because you're not quite sure where he's going musically until you hear the trumpet come in and you've established what the piece of music is. Because Miles Davis wouldn't have introduced this song to the audience. He would have literally had his back to them and played his trumpet because he wasn't interested in what an audience thought. And finally, what was the interesting thing that happened about 2 3/4 minutes in? Well, if you got that far, you would have heard that the band suddenly go into a kind of medium swing tempo. Now, we've been, in the last 2.5 minutes, in ballad times of really slow. My Funny Valentine 4. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's really slow, isn't it? If we think about most music now is about 1, 2, 3, 4. A very kind of driving beat. But this was really slow. So for them to suddenly go into that swing feel, I think that's really, really surprising. So well done if you got that one. Well, I really hope you enjoyed listening to this piece of music. I do think that it's really, really incredible. And if you've got any ideas of songs that you think, or pieces of music, don't have to be songs, pieces of music that you think it would be really great for us to all listen to together in the Listening Project, then do send me an email or let me know through the LyricLand website. Fantastic. The LyricLand website is magically appearing. Look at that. Oh, it's good. I should have made like a jingly noise. It's good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't listened to some of the other listening projects, feel free to get involved with those. And we've got loads of rhythm games and singing games and don't clap, this one back, and all of that stuff that you can get involved with too. See you again very soon, everybody. Bye!
If you've got ears on your head and your brain in between, you're ready for a little bit listening.
Ning, 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 listening.